I played, I played Ruth Younger in 1950, and I played Ruth Younger in 1959 in Lorraine Hansberry's play, A Raisin in the Sun.
And what was your, now I remember that you told me this and I read this, that you first thought you wanted to do Beneatha. But,
yes.
But your first impression of Ruth was something about her being a little wifey type. What was?
Yes, before I really could appreciate the difficulty of such roles, the Ruths of life, behind the ironing board, the looking after and looking up to this unworthy man, this unlucky man, this black man, this, you know, this standing by the side of this person with so many problems, you know, mostly brought on by racism. So that's what I felt. And I felt it was, I guess I felt on the verge of portraying a stereotype. It was almost like, you know, this good black woman there always by the side of.
Where was she before she got married? How did she wind up with this man?
I believe that they were just very much attracted to each other. And as Walter Lee said, they've been married 11 years, so they've had time for the realities to set in. You know, why is his son, after 11 years, sleeping in the living room at his mother's house?
But
the frustrations of his life.
And
I think
she's holding in frustration.
Hmm?
She is holding in her own frustration.
Yeah, she's holding in her own frustrations because she doesn't know what to do to keep him from being frustrated. How does he get around racism? Where does he look to get ahead in terms of being a small-time business operator, or why can he only look forward to being a chauffeur, or you know, she knows about racism. She knows that she's working as a maid, and she might have done, had the schools been encouraging, had the lifestyle at the time she lived been more even-handed in the tax dollars spent in the schools in the black communities as opposed to those spent in the white communities. And I remember all myself growing up knowing that the only reason I went to college is because one of my friend's mother looked white, and she was a teacher, and thinking she was white, they would say things in her presence, and she found out that our school was being left out of the program that would permit us to take the exam to get into Hunter College. Schools were determined by something other than fairness, which ones could take the test and which couldn't. And she fought to get our junior high school. So the same thing is with Ruth. We know that you come with a sense of knowing that the cards are stacked against you, that the odds are not in your favor. And if there is an advantage, somehow there will be a conspiracy to rob you of it. So these things are part of your subconscious. My earliest recollection is of picket lines saying, "Don't buy where you can't work." You know, I live in a black community, but you couldn't own the black store, and you couldn't work in the store if you got living in. I mean, you know. Mm-hmm. So I grew up understanding that was a given, and Walter too.
She is in a way, she's very close to her mother-in-law. Mm-hmm. They have a connection that Lena, the mother-in-law, doesn't have to her own daughter. She seems closer to Lena than Beneatha does.
Yes, because they both work in service. You know, they both do the jobs that are permitted to them as black women, one of the few jobs, mostly a service. You know, you eventually might be a teacher or a secretary, but the fields were limited, and so they had something in common. They both worked for white people.
Do you think that, I mean, when we meet Ruth, she's 30, it's 1959, so her sister-in-law, Benny, is starting to break out into the wider world. Do you think she has a sense of envy about what Benny is doing with her life?
I think she's rooting for her, but afraid for her. And she's unaccustomed to somebody wanting to be a doctor, a black woman wanting to be a doctor. So half of her is afraid, and half of her is, I think half of her wants her to succeed, and half of her is afraid, because she doesn't have any experience with young black women aspiring to become other than maids or teachers or maybe a secretary.
It is a generational divide. Benny's 10 years younger, and so at 20 in 1959,
Yes.
Even though it's just 10 years, it's almost a generation's difference.
Yes. It is almost a generation, but we tend to be more hopeful for our children. And I think she's amused by her too, you know. She's amused by this new. I can't think of Ruth as being envious of her sister-in-law. I feel that she's rooting for her mostly, and I can only take that from what I've seen in my own life when growing up. You wish it might have happened to you, but it doesn't. So you get a satisfaction when it happens to your children or your sister or somebody else. You're envious a little bit, but mostly you're glad for them.
Well, then let's talk about Travis, because here she has a child who is growing up in a way that has kind of reduced circumstances, and still the mother, Ruth, has to keep a disciplined eye on him against the permissiveness maybe of the father or the grandmother. So she has a different role to play in terms of how Travis is being raised.
She doesn't want Walter Lee to spoil the boy because of all the things that he senses that he's missed in his life growing up. His father couldn't have afforded to be so free with the 50 cents, and 50 cents means more to that family than he is pretending. I mean, he's being extravagant and foolish when they, you know what I'm saying. She doesn't see how they can afford it, but there is also, he doesn't see how they can afford not to.
Ruth gets pregnant again.
Yes.
And she has to face the decision about whether to keep this child. What's your memory of how Ruth worked her way through those decisions?
How she worked? What's my...
Well, she knows she's pregnant. She gives the $5 deposit to get an abortion. What's in her mind? What is in her history and their history and her personally about, do I keep the baby or don't I?
The realities, I think, dictate that she decides to get rid of the baby. First of all, there would be no place to keep it. Well, where are you going to put it? And where's this job coming? How are you going to feed it? And a little bit later than that, later on, it's not that when this child gets to be working, you can't put it out in the field to help you bring in a crop. You can't put it in a factory to add to the income. It becomes a burden rather than an asset. In our early history in this country, the more children you had, the better, especially before the child labor laws were passed, because that meant another income. But now another child is, and you had to figure out how much more money you had to make in order to support that child. So it became, and here is Walter wanting to move out in other directions and needing money, and he wasn't going to be happy. I think she knew that Walter's mind was far away from being a father again, and that's not where he was going. He wanted some personal satisfactions in terms of the monies he could make and the things he could do and the things they could enjoy together.
This film, I saw the film, was my first experience with this text, was a revelation to me. I mean, I grew up in a small town, Pennsylvania, all white, Italians, Poles. It was my first view into Black America. And it was a revelation to see how open the conflict was. Mm-hmm. Because in a strange way, I had a romanticized view of Black families, that there was a cohesion there that white families didn't have, a cohesion that came from adversity. And I saw in Lorraine's play a kind of universal sense that every family faces these conflicts. Was there some reaction when you did it similar to what I had, that white Americans seeing an aspect of their own society that they were unfamiliar with?
No, I felt that whites were looking at this play as phenomenon apart from themselves. You know, we talk about, the whites talk about blacks as they and them, and otherness about it. I mean, it's still true to this day when what we have in common is far more current than what we don't have in common. So, but I'm thinking in terms of my own reaction to the play itself. For example, moving out to the white neighborhood, I had never wanted to do that personally because I treasure a peace of mind. I wouldn't want to move into a hostile environment, somebody just tolerating me, somebody just, you know, and permitting me in their presence. Lorraine wrote this play from a Chicago experience, you know, when there again, whites conspired to put all Black people into a segregated community, and before you know it, these things give rise to slums, give rise to lack of respect. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? What happens to a dream deferred?
Thank you. Well,
You want me to read it again? Was that okay?
is that okay? Yeah. You wrote, I think it was in your book, about you discovered in New Haven that this was a comedy drama.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I never will forget when we were on the road, we were doing tryouts in New Haven with Raisin, and Lloyd was the director. The audience, I remembered, had laughed far more than we had anticipated. And that surprised me, especially Sydney and I had the opening scene, and we had rehearsed it as a drama. And because Lloyd has, and with Lloyd, you know. And I hadn't quite made up my mind what to do with all this laughter. And so afterwards, the next day or that night, Lloyd told me that he wanted me to, he started telling me, giving me other motivations to lead me to the laugh, to lead me to lighten up a little bit, so I shouldn't be so, each eggs, Walter. So I shouldn't be so serious. It wasn't but all the rationale, he began to change the rationale. And I was feeling so confused, and I started to cry because And Lorraine came over to me and she said, asked me could she help anything that she could talk to me about. And I remember being very annoyed with her for asking me that question, because this is not what Lloyd had told me in terms of the rationale of this opening scene. We talked about a really very serious moment. There was no laughter in our rehearsals there. No laughter called for, none expected. And it dawned on me, I think maybe again after talking with Oscar on the phone, and that maybe what he was trying to say was, Ruby, lighten up. People want to laugh. And remember that. But I was a drama, a serious dramatic actress, and nobody had ever said that to me before. I didn't know at that time that I'm what my husband calls a humorist. I thought I was a tragedian because somebody had told me that. But at any rate, if he didn't have to give me any rationale. All he needed to have said to me was, Ruby, lighten up. I don't know if I ever told him this or not, because people want to laugh. I think I would have understood. But then I appreciated his trying to bring the laughter from another kind of reality. I thought of her as coming from a very serious place, getting up morning after morning, fix breakfast, get Travis off to school, and then get ready herself to go to work for the lady she worked for, you know what I mean? So, and then having to listen to Walter. I mean, you know, she backgrounded everybody's life, you know.
She's the character that pulls everybody together.
That's right. What I call that character. I was on stage all the time. You don't realize it when you read the text, but I was there. I was on stage with Azagai and Benitha, with Mama and Walter, with most everything that happened. Ruth is there. She was, and that is an extremely difficult role to play, because you have to be connected to the scene whether you have anything to say or not. I mean, things happen to you as you watch and listen, and if anybody acknowledges your opinion, you know, you have to be on your toes at every step. You can't let your mind wander, you know.
In a way, she may be the point of view character that Lorraine wanted. I mean, if you know Lorraine's life, you would think Benitha's her character. Benitha's Ruth.
Yes.
But it's really Ruth who is the perspective.
Yes.
Did Lorraine ever talk to you about that?
No, not that I remember. I really didn't speak that much with Lorraine, mostly because I thought she was intellectually my superior. And secondly, no, but that wasn't true. We were just different in our I should have been more courageous. But I'd never, as I realize it now, I was unaccustomed to listening to young women with philosophical points of view, capable of arguing with anybody, you know.
What do you think the biggest misconception is about Ruth?
The biggest misconception about Ruth, I think, is that this is a bland character that's only seen as background, backgrounding everybody else's life. Because one of the most significant people in any family, I think, is that character with whom everybody interacts, against whom everybody vents their angers and their aspirations, and she's the listener. She's the listener in the tribe. And I therefore think it's an important, intricate, and difficult role to play. So when Lloyd said to me, Ruby, I need you to do Ruth, I remember that so well. And in other times, with other roles similar to Ruth, I hear that admonition ringing in my ear.